Tom Allon,
Hey, good to be here.
the one, the only. Hey, Tom, before we get into the meat and potatoes, I wanna give you your flowers. You and I did some semblance of this at my first go around, and we met. I think we had lunch or we had at a
Yeah,
place on Madison Avenue
yes, yes.
between 28th and 29th, or 29th and 30th. I'll never forget.
The
And
Carlton Hotel, maybe?
oh, I
Yeah,
don't remember the
what?
hotel, but I remember we had a great conversation, and then you
Yes,
helped elevated me because that was the day you told me, "Hey, do you want to be on part of the list, the 40 under 40 list?"
yes, yes, yes,
And
yes. And you,
I still qualify, by the way.
is that right?
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I wish.
How many years ago was that?
Oh, I
When
don't
we
want
did,
to.
Listen,
It's been a hot
that's
minute, but
that's
but
how I
Tom,
do. That's how I do the math to figure out how old
but
people are.
Tom,
Anyway, go
I really want to just thank you because you've always sort of played this role of a elder statesman, and it's interesting you and Dick Ravitch worked on this Five Boro Institute that I don't want to get ahead
Thank
of,
you,
but I want to
thank
say
you.
something about city and state, and then we'll get into the interview. I
Sure.
remember when your paper was beginning, one of the early years of the paper, and
Yep.
Edward Isaac Dover wrote that major story that I don't think gets the credit in terms of political lore that it deserves. And that was the DFS story.
Yes. Wow.
And
You have good, great memory.
the reason I mentioned that story is because remember the WFP
Hmm.
had figured out how to defeat the county organizations have not been the same since.
Yes.
I
Yes.
remember Danny Drum, Jamani, Lander,
Yep.
Squadron,
Yep.
Jalissa Ferreras. I'm forgetting some, but there were more. Were part of that wave.
Absolutely.
That was the catalyst for the speakers race, which was the beginning of a non-county leader decided speaker race, and some of the same players were
Hmm.
involved in that as they were in '09.
Yep. Yep.
One of them that was heavily involved in that '09 race was a mutual friend, Neil Quatra. That was when the HTC was known as the Hotel Motels Trades Council.
I didn't know. I forgot that. That's funny. Yeah. I mean, listen. Isaac did a piece. I want to say was it 2008? I think it was 2008 or 2009. You're right. It was a series of articles about how the WFP was using its political consulting arm to give advantages to its endorsed candidates by giving them discounted rates, which violated campaign finance law. And I believe Preet Bharara picked up a lot of the information that ended up in that indictment from Isaac's reporting, and it was fantastic reporting. And believe me, I lost a lot of sleep over that one and lots of money for lawyers' bills vetting that story. And to this day, I'm sure that there's a Tom Allen voodoo doll in the WFP offices with with some pins pushed in it because Dan Cantor and some of his colleagues hated me afterwards, that thinking that I had something to do with that piece, or that ultimately I was responsible for it as a publisher. And it was the same year that I was consulting for the Bloomberg mayoral campaign, the third mayoral campaign, and they tried to make some sort of linkage to that, which was bullshit. But you have a great memory. That was really the story that put City and State, it was then called City Hall newspaper, on the map. And Isaac became he went from a friendly reporter, and it was a friendly newspaper, to being a much more of an investigative reporter. I don't know if you remember, but maybe a few months after that story came out, um, Kristen Gillibrand had just become appointed senator by David Patterson the year before, and she was running for re-election the first time, and there was a couple people lining up to run against her, and one of them was Carolyn Maloney, the congresswoman on the Upper East Side, and Isaac did a profile of her, and he interviewed her. I think she was sitting with her then campaign manager Richie Fife, and we would go to press on Friday nights, the newspaper, and Isaac would leave me the pages in my box before I left on Friday, so I can look at them, on the way home to make sure there was nothing objectionable. And I looked at the Maloney story; it looked fine. And then Monday morning, I walked into my office, and the paper had just come out. It just came online, and there was a firestorm online, including a statement from Al Sharpton blasting Carolyn Maloney because she had apparently used the N word in the story that Isaac published. She was referring to a trip she made to Puerto Rico, and they said to her that Kirsten Gillibrand was treating them like, the N word, and she used the full word, unfortunately. Um, she she called me a couple hours later saying I did not say that, and if I did, I said it off the record. And I said, Carolyn, I'm sorry, but I listened to the tape and you didn't use the word off the record until about half an hour later, referring to something else. And by the way, what are you going to do? Put out a press release saying I said that word, but I didn't, but I said it off the record? And she dropped out of the race the next day. A week or two after that, Isaac was down in D.C. doing a profile of Steve Israel, who was the congressman in Long Island, who was also planning to run for senator. And while he was interviewing him, Steve had taken an important call from the president's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel. And apparently, after he got that phone call, he said to Isaac, "I'm very sorry. I have to stop this interview. I have to go over to the president's office." And apparently, what Isaac found out exclusively was that Rahm Emanuel had told him that if he ran for senator, that President Obama would campaign against him in black neighborhoods in New York. And so Steve Israel didn't run. And really, those two people falling was kind of the beginning of Kirsten Gillibrand's, pretty easy walk into that almost lifetime Senate seat.
Interesting.
Um,
I have something I want to piggyback off that story.
sure, sure.
I am at the Queens Democratic Party holiday party,
Hmm.
and they were moving around Carolyn Kennedy Schlossberg.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
I see
That's right.
that. I watched the leadership there introducing her, and she's working the room. And at that same party, I say hello to then State Senator Hiram Montserrat,
Mm,
who was in his peak with Jalissa Ferreras.
yep.
Remember, John Sabini was, I would say, potentially, I could use maybe the word sacrifice to keep
Yes.
Hiram from running
Yep.
against the county leader.
Hmm.
But ironically, he is sober as a judge. The very next day, I wake up to a reel on New York One where he has a Met hat and he is being paraded in handcuffs out of his residence. So that was that night I remember clearly.
Interesting. Interesting.
Part of the
Yeah, I mean,
whole Gillibrand thing.
right.
Where
Caroline Kennedy looked like it for a moment there that she was going to be the candidate, right? But she kind of shot herself in the foot. Right? I think she made some statements that were way off base.
so Tom, let's move into the latest state of play, and that
Yes,
also
yes,
was the beginning. I mean, I wouldn't say the end. The WFP is still around, but that was the at the top of their power
yes.
since
Yeah,
they've
it's one of
had
them.
the governor went after them. A lot of the unions have pulled out, so
Yep.
it set off a chain of events in terms of this third party. That let's see what
Hmm.
Jasmine and Ana Maria do. Moving right along, Tom, Five Boro Institute,
Yes.
which you founded. I want to
Yes.
start there. I
Hmm.
read the story in the New York Times in 2022
Hmm.
where it is announced Grace Rao is executive director.
Hmm.
You're heavily involved. Dick Ravitch, who we just mentioned, heavily involved.
Hmm.
Interestingly enough, in that New York Times article, the people in the current administration that were quoted were Lorraine Grillo, no longer there.
Yep.
Ashwin Vasan, no longer there. Chancellor Banks, no longer there. I think Sheena Wright potentially. I don't want to miss or speak out of turn or say something that's not accurate, but interestingly enough, that was not even 2 years ago or 2 years to the day approximately, and none of the
Mm-hmm.
people that validated the policy ideas that you proposed
Yeah.
in the rollout are there.
Yep.
All right, let's start with Grace Rao has been all over City. Yes, congestion pricing. She
Mm-hmm.
put out some ideas recently about how to make New York City more affordable. Interestingly enough, last year of a 4 year, the first term of this administration, I see some of it now finally coming to light, unless I'm missing something. I want to hear your take on how much of it do you feel has actually been implemented,
Mm-hmm.
and what are your thoughts on how things have been rolled out, if or do you feel it's been really not even a half a loaf?
So wow, how much time do you have, Roberto? So first of all, just to give just a quick step back, the Five Boro Institute was an idea that I had after a breakfast meeting I had with Eric Adams right after he won the primary. We had breakfast and he said, "So what do you want to do? Do you want to come work in the administration?" And my son, Jonah Allen, had been his press secretary at Borough Hall and was going to go to City Hall with him. He ended up becoming deputy press secretary. And I said to Eric, I said, you got enough Allens in your administration. Why don't I see what I can do on the outside and maybe start a think tank that can feed ideas, because really policy is what I like to do anyway. Um, and I remember a couple weeks later, I had this idea. I said, there's a Manhattan Institute, which is on the right. Why don't we start a progressive institute called the Brooklyn Institute? So I called him up. I said, Eric, I have an idea. Remember that think tank we talked about? I want to call it the Brooklyn Institute. He said, Tom, that's too limiting. You should really call it the Five Boro Institute. And that was really the genesis of the name. And then I went to Dick Ravitch a week later and told him about my idea. And he said, I love that idea. I want to be your co-founder. I want to be your co-chair. I want to help you get this off the ground, which he did. And we worked very hard together over the next couple of months raising money. We raised about $1 million from a lot of tech firms, real estate firms, philanthropists, and hired Grace. And she's done some great work the last couple of years. But going back to the administration, I had very high hopes for Eric Adams and for his administration. Um, I'm still a big fan of Eric Adams as a human being. I believe, and I was my one trepidation about him when he was elected, and he and I talked about this a lot. And I tried to help him through the mayor classes I did with him. Was his was two things. One was his management abilities, and number two was his ability to attract top talent over cronies. And unfortunately, on both of those counts, my trepidations turned out to be real and accurate. Um, Ironically, right now, Eric has the best administration that he's had since he started. I mean, he kind of started off with, half an all-star team and half of minor leaguers. Um, some of the people that have left, and I'm not referring necessarily to anybody in particular here, but some of the people that left were either hindrances or really not in the right job or not ready for the job that they were in. But I think Jessica Tisch as police commissioner was a great choice, and she now is not encumbered by a bad structure that Eric had set up with Mr. Banks as the deputy mayor and overseeing the police commissioner. I think that was a big mistake. I think Maria Torres Springer, who I saw recently for breakfast, is extremely qualified to be first deputy mayor, and I think that was, even though I like Sheena a lot, and I think she has a great future ahead of her. I think that was not the right job for her. And I think in general, the administration is stronger. Eric, on the one hand, I will say that I don't think the mayor gets credit for certain things that he's accomplished. And I said this publicly at an event about a year ago, a Five Boro event where I introduced the mayor. He ran on public safety and making the city safer. You can argue that the city is not as safe as it was before the pandemic, but it is certainly safer than it was than when Bill de Blasio handed it over to him in a mess. Major crime has gone down. There are obviously some categories that have gone up, or there's certainly, a lot of concern about the subways, which I share. But in general, I think Eric has done a good job. And I think one of the things that he told me when we had dinner about a year after he started was that the hardest thing in his first year was turning around the morale in the police department. He literally went from precinct to precinct, giving pep talks to the police who were so demoralized from the de Blasio administration. So I give him credit for that. I also think that the city has come back from a business standpoint. 80% of people are going to their offices these days, in most neighborhoods. Um, and generally, the economy is quite good in New York, and I think the mayor deserves some credit for that. And then I think the other thing that people don't really give him credit for is that he was handed the equivalent of a small city of immigrants, migrants who came to New York, who not only had to be housed, but fed, clothed, and had their children educated. And we never saw tent cities. We never saw chaos, or at least, only in small pockets of the city were there any sort of evidence of overflowing in hotels and things like that. And so I think the mayor and his team did a really, really good job of assimilating a very tough and very difficult situation. So I think, I judge mayors by what they inherited and what they leave, just like I think of presidents the same way. I think Mayor Bloomberg inherited a very broken city after 9/11, and I think he left a pristine city, or somewhat pristine city. I mean, he had some of his blind spots on income inequality and things like that, and stop and frisk. But by and large, he handed off a pretty good city to Bill de Blasio. 8 years later, Bill de Blasio, a lot of it due to his policies the first 7 years, but some of it also, much of it due to what happened during COVID, handed off a very damaged city to Eric Adams. Um, I believe now, almost, 3.5 years later, the city is better. It's probably not as good as it should be. And again, I think if the mayor, I used to say this about the mayor, about Eric, that if he was a basketball player, he would score 20 points a night, but he would make 10 turnovers. I think he makes unforced errors, and none of them are ill-intentioned, but I think he just sometimes isn't disciplined enough, and also doesn't have anyone around him who tells him no or tells him not to do certain things. And so I think, and I also believe that he hasn't been treated fairly by the media. But again, part of that I think is because of the way he and his communications team has handled the media. And I warned Eric about this. I said, don't make the same mistake de Blasio made and go to war with the media, because that's a fight you'll never win. And he did that from day one. The night of his victory party, he and his communications team, my son was on that team, although I don't think he agreed with this decision, excluded two of the top journalists in New York from that party, Ross Barkan and David Friedlander, because they had been critical of the mayor during the campaign. That to me set a very bad tone, and I think it hasn't resulted in anything positive for the mayor. When
Tom,
Mike,
you let
when
the
Mike,
go ahead, finish. Apologies.
One last thing. No, just one last thought, which is when Mike Bloomberg was mayor, the the way that he and his team handled the media was much less combative, was much more professional, and particularly in his election years, they would go put on a charm offensive, and people like me who published local weekly newspapers were invited to Gracie Mansion once or twice to sit with the mayor for breakfast in small groups and to give the mayor our feedback. And I told this to Eric, and I've told this to other people, who are running this time. Anybody who's asked me for advice, I say, you need to go on a charm offensive with the media because, and really have them get to know you, and you get to know them, because making them your adversary is not going to be helpful to your campaign.
Tom, go ahead. Do you have another thought?
Yeah, just one other thing, which is that again, I think the mayor is in a very, I mean, I don't even know. I haven't seen the news today. I've been working all day, but I know he had a meeting in Mar-a-Lago with the president-elect. Would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that meeting. I think right now the mayor is in a very tough situation because, from a legal standpoint, his best hope is that the president either does a preemptive pardon or has the U.S. attorney or encourages the U.S. attorney to throw out his case, which I think is a somewhat bullshit case. But in a Democratic primary in New York City, having the president-elect who I think didn't do very well in the five boroughs, and even in this last election, did better than he did before, is not necessarily something that's going to help Eric electorally. With Andrew Cuomo looming in the campaign, and I think very likely to announce by the end of February that the mayor's chances of being reelected looks, not impossible, but certainly slimmer than it should be. I give him a 25% chance of being reelected at this point.
Tom, what do you think? Do you think Governor Cuomo runs?
I think Governor,
I heard an interesting angle from someone.
sure.
Someone that who I respect says that despite what he's doing and saying, he doesn't run because he has some trepidation of a do-over of Carl McCall and how that went south for him and Patterson, meaning that
Yeah, I
he
know.
understands, Tom, that this is his last best chance,
Mm-hmm.
potentially, that if he doesn't win or is assured of victory, that his career at 67 years old could potentially be over.
Listen, life is about timing, right? In general, you're right. 23 years ago, I think it was roughly, Andrew Cuomo ran against Carl McCall and didn't I wouldn't say got his ass kicked, but was really forced to remove himself from that campaign before the election because the establishment, the Democratic Party, um, sent a very clear message to him that he needed to wait his turn, and it I think pissed off the African American community that he was trying to hop ahead of a very well respected senior statesman of the black community, Paul McCall. It took Cuomo about 4 years to recover from that. I met him in 2005 when he was kind of in the wilderness. We actually met at Scott Stringer's inauguration for Manhattan Borough President in I think it was early 2005. And I got to know Andrew the next year as he was trying to make a comeback and run for Attorney General. And my newspapers were, I believe, the first or one of the first media in the city to endorse him for Attorney General. So I agree with you. I think he has PTSD from that race. I think Andrew Cuomo, the only person that knows whether Andrew Cuomo is going to run for mayor or not is Andrew Cuomo, and I'm not even sure he knows for sure. Um,
I want a
every,
prediction. I want a prediction, Tom.
I predict he will run, and he'll announce at the end of February. However, I think he's going to wait as long as he can to make a decision. The less time he spends in the meat grinder of a primary, the better for him because he's going to become a target as the front runner, and as somebody who has a fair amount of baggage. He, I think right now is the odds-on favorite to win, but So was Mayor Andrew Yang and Mayor Christine Quinn 4 years ago, and 12 years ago. Scott Stringer, who again is an old friend and somebody I've known in politics for a long time, also is trying to make a comeback. Again, I don't think he's a favorite, but I think he's somebody who has a chance of winning. And he slew a former gubernatorial dragon in 2013 against Elliot Spitzer. So for Andrew Cuomo to run now, it's not a slam dunk, and also he'll go through a lot of painful days, being attacked by his fellow candidates. And I also think there's a good chance that the sons and daughters of people who died in nursing homes could potentially come after him in the same way that the animal rights people came after Christine Quinn in 2013. So I think Andrew Cuomo runs. I would bet on it, but I wouldn't bet a lot of money. But another scenario could be that the governor is keeping himself relevant for the next month or two, or however long he can wait till he makes a decision, so that when he runs in 2026 against either Kathy Hochul or whoever else is in that race, he's got a positive brand, or more positive brand. So I think he sees the mayoral race as an opening for him to make a comeback, but a lot of things can happen over the next 30 days or so before petitioning starts, and he could very well change his mind, decide that running for governor in 26 is a better option. Um,
Tom, you led the mayoral school for Mayor Adams. You put it
mhm,
together. You were
mhm,
instrumental in making it happen. Give me
mhm.
a letter grade. Mayoral
Uh,
school. How would you grade Mayor Adams nearing the end of his first year? I mean, first term, better said. He said
well,
he's Aaron Judge. Some people think he's Manny Mendoza of the infamous Mendoza line in Major League Baseball.
I know the Mendoza line, right? It was 185 um, batting average. I believe that Eric Adams, as a student at Mayor's School back in 2019 and 2020, got an A for attendance and attention and eagerness. I believe during the debates he got an A to an A minus for articulating a vision and absorbing some of those lessons from their school. I believe now at the near the end of his, or 3/4 of the way through his term, I would give him an overall B grade, B or B minus, in overall effectiveness. I think in terms of moving the city forward, he would get a higher grade, but I think that overall grade is weighed down by um, the cronyism, the management failings, and the communications failings that he has had in articulating to the city what he's doing. There are so many impressive things that are going on in education. David Banks made a huge change to the way we teach reading in the schools. That will take 5 or 10 years to pay off, but it will be a sea change in the way we educate young children. There's two developments in NYCHA that are going to be um, um, improved dramatically in the Chelsea houses and the Fulton houses by a program called RAD that this mayor has been able to push forward. And I think that if those succeed, which I think they will, they'll set a template for how to overhaul NYCHA over the next 10 years. So there's a lot of things that the mayor is doing. City of Yes, I think will be a success ultimately. The zoning changes that he made. So there's a lot of things that the mayor has done in the last 2 or 3 years that he may not get credit for in the short term, but in the same way that we just lionized Jimmy Carter as president, even though for his career and some of the accomplishments he had, like the Camp David Accords, many years later, even though he was considered a failed president. after we left office. I think Eric Adams, history will be kinder to Eric Adams than the present is.
Tom, Dr. King said that the budget is a moral document.
Yeah.
Mayor announced his preliminary budget. Cuts were largely missing, but folks were highlighting the fact that 3K, which has been a thorn in his side, early learn, was notably absent in terms of the funding levels needed to move it along.
Hmm.
How problematic is that leading up to a primary where bread and butter issues are at the top? Mental health and dealing with mental people with mental health illness in our subways, in as part of the homeless population, seems to be near the top. But
Hmm.
right along with it are issues like daycare. Everyone is pushing daycare, universal daycare. How problematic is this? Or do you think it's just a carrot for negotiating, which is usually what happens? They make an announcement, they fight, and at the end they make up and the deal is made.
I mean, listen, when Eric won the primary in 2021, a few days later, I spoke to him, and we had done a number of mayor classes about universal daycare, and I had been pushing him to look at the French model of creches where they had a universal childcare there on a sliding scale, and very successful daycare where child development experts ran the daycare centers so that kids would not just have their diapers changed, infants, but also have their brains developed. And Eric was really keen to do universal daycare. I said to him, what's going to be your signature achievement in your first year, like de Blasio did universal pre-K? And he said, I wanted to be universal daycare. Somehow that never happened, and he lost the thread. And I'm not sure whether it was the migrants or whether it was because he was focused on public safety, but that was something that it was a missed opportunity, and now everybody's talking about it. Um, Number two, on the mental health front, I applaud his intentions and even some of his execution in getting in getting the homeless mentally ill off the streets and off the subways. I have never been a huge fan of involuntary commitment. I believe that what the mayor and the governor are missing is that you have to give people who have mental illness and homeless and who are homeless an appealing place to go to during the day and during the evening in order to get them to do this thing voluntarily. There is I introduced Eric during mayor classes to a gentleman named Ashwin Vashon, who later became health commissioner, who ran an organization called Fountain House, which, in the interest of full disclosure, is where one of my children works, my daughter. And Fountain House is an organization that helps severely mentally ill people through clubhouses, with membership in clubhouses, get services and get treatment and training so that they can become independent. And I toured their facility on 47th Street and 8th and 9th yesterday, and I was blown away by how incredible the work they're doing over there. There's 1,300 members in that clubhouse, and there's three of them around the city, or three by Fountain House, one in Manhattan, one in the South Bronx, and one in Harlem, and one in Midtown. Um, I, if the mayor and the governor would embrace that model and have 50 of those built over the next 3 to 4 years, that would go a long way towards solving the mental health crisis in the city, because there'd be a place for these people to go each day and to get the services they need. It's not that expensive, and it's not that difficult to execute. Um, and I think, in terms of public safety and the subways, which has been another Achilles heel of the mayors and the governors, 2.5 years ago, I wrote a column in City and State, my publication, that suggested that we have a beat cop walk up and down the subways, each subway, 20. In my mind, it should be 24/7. And the mayor embraced that idea, but it was then attacked by Pat Lynch at the PBA, saying there must be two cops together. Now, 2.5 years later, the governor has come up with a plan for 6 months to do that overnight, which I think is certainly a huge step in the right direction, but still half a loaf, not a full loaf. You've got to get people to feel comfortable in the subways in order for the city to make a full comeback. And I know as a 62-year-old man who spent 62 years of his life in New York and has ridden the subways, tens of thousands of times. The other night was one of the first times in my life where I came out of Madison Square Garden at 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 after a Knick game, and I thought twice about getting on the subway or spending extra money for a taxi. And that's something that you don't want people like me to start thinking about because that drives people out of the city.
Tom, go ahead, finish.
No, it's like again, I don't know if I'm answering your question,
No, you are. You are.
um, but the mayor, I believe this mayor has great intentions. I believe he's a fantastic public face for New York. I think he's a great cheerleader for New York. He has a lot of the same qualities that Ed Koch had in terms of being a booster of New York. Bill de Blasio sometimes looked like he was getting root canal when he was running the city. He didn't seem too happy. But I think the mayor has been a victim of his own mismanagement, and that's why he has a huge primary coming up and a huge uphill fight to win. But he's got 5 months to turn it around, and we'll see on June 24th and June 25th, on June 24th, where the city is, and how the people feel about him.
Tom, what do you think of Governor Hochul, and what would you say in your analysis has been the reason why her polling is not great? And because her polling is not great, some people refer to her as the accidental governor. That creates a lane where a Congressmember Richie Torres, a Congressmember Mike Lawler, her own lieutenant governor, are thinking, are talking, are
Mm-hmm.
exploring, are openly taking shots at a sitting member, in the case of Torres and
Mm-hmm.
Delgado, of their own party.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're living in an era, not just in New York, but nationally and internationally, where incumbents are less secure than they've been in the past. I think that the country post-COVID is in a very cynical, angry state. A lot of latent anger is coming out after what happened 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I think the governor and the mayor are both somewhat victims of that. I think Governor Hochul has done some things quite well. I think she's been a steadying hand. There's been no corruption in her administration. There's no accusations of improper behavior among her or anybody who works around her. I think she's made some missteps. Some of them because they were again well intentioned. I think even though ultimately congestion pricing has gotten off the ground, and I think she made a political move, which I guess at the time seemed sound and did pay off potentially in saving 3 seats in Long Island and upstate for Congress, but unfortunately wasn't enough for Hakeem Jeffries to take over as Speaker. Um, I think the problem with the governor is that she doesn't have the same kind of forceful and magnetic personality that an Andrew Cuomo has, or other leaders have had, and so I think she's underestimated because of that. But she's a very steady hand, and she's somebody who works harder than anybody I've ever seen in politics. I knew her when she was lieutenant governor, and we used to have breakfast like twice or three times a year in New York, and it was usually at 7 a.m. at the Midtown, hotel where she was staying, and that was going to be the first of 10 to 15 meetings she was having around the state. So even as lieutenant governor, which was a pretty is a pretty weak position compared to the one she's in right now, she was really the Energizer Bunny. Um, I like Richie Torres a lot. I think he's got a huge future ahead of him. He's very courageous in the way that he's defended Israel and done other things that are impressive. I don't know whether he's got the executive skills to be a governor. We'll see over a campaign if he can prove that. Antonio Delgado seems like a very smart man. But again, it's a lot easier to take shots at people, and it's a lot easier to be a legislator than it is to be an executive. As Ed Koch once said, about being mayor, if a bird dies in Queens, they blame me. And that's the stuff that Eric Adams and Governor Hochul are suffering from. We blame our executive leaders, just like Joe Biden got blamed for so many things that were not necessarily his fault. And from my vantage point, the country today is 4 years after Joe Biden took office is in a much better place than it was when he first came into office. And that's again how I judge leaders. So I think Governor Hochul will have a primary. And I think that's probably going to be the way of the future. I don't think incumbents are going to get free passes like they have in the past, unless they're overwhelmingly popular.
So, Tom, let's wrap this up because we
Sure.
covered Trump and the mayor's visit to Mar-a-Lago. We
Yep.
covered the budget, the prelim. We covered the governor. I want to wrap this up. You made one prediction that Governor Hochul will get a primary. You made a second prediction that former Governor Cuomo will run for mayor.
Hmm.
Give me the third prediction for 2025, if you have one. You have two
Um,
already.
um, I think there's going to be some choppy waters in the economy in 2025, both locally and nationally. I think the president and the Congress um, may try to do too much too fast, and interest rates um, not going down will hamper the real estate market from making a significant comeback, and will hamper first-time buyers and people who want to sell their apartments and move to different apartments. So I'm a little worried about the economy being a little choppy this year in New York and nationally. I don't know if that's a prediction or just a hedge. Um, and I think ultimately New York is going to make a comeback like it always does. But again, I think we're going through some choppy times. And given where we were 5 years ago in the midst of a pandemic, I think we've gotten to a better place. But we will need really strong leadership the next 4 years to rebuild the city in the same way that Mike Bloomberg was able to rebuild it post 9/11.
Tom, anything you want to add to the conversation? Anything I forgot to mention? So, if you said Mayor Adams, last question, Mayor Adams is at a 25% re-election. In your another prediction, you said he's got a 25% chance of being re-elected.
Hmm.
Governor Cuomo is running.
Hmm.
Who is your dark horse in the race? Who do you think can sneak up on people, taking into consideration Governor Cuomo's negatives, taking into consideration Mayor Adams' negatives, and a lot of variables in between? Who do you think can come in at the end of the day, put it together? Who is your dark horse?
Um, I mean, that's a great question. I'm going to be a little bit long-winded for a second
That's
here.
fine. That's fine.
Um,
I want to
z
hear the
the
in-depth
analysis.
analysis.
So I wrote a column recently, about 2 weeks ago, about the candidate Zoran Mamdani, who I have never met before, but I'm having lunch with on Monday. And from afar, I've been impressed by him and his campaign, not because I agree necessarily with all of the policies he's espousing, but because he has a clear message, and I think his message is resonating with the left. And I think he's winning the race to for those who are going to the left. Even I think he's doing even better than Brad Lander, who is clearly a more high profile and more experienced elected leader. So I think Mamdani could potentially coalesce the left, but that said, I think there's a ceiling of how many people are going to vote for him, um, uh, because I think the left wing of the Democratic Party, particularly the voting part of the left wing of the party, is not much more than 20 to at most 30% of the Democratic vote. Um, I believe, ranked choice voting has created a different dynamic, and I think no one has really clearly articulated the best strategies around ranked choice voting. I do believe that alliances are very important. If I were running, I would try to be creating alliances. So, for example, in 2021, Andrew Yang and Catherine Garcia very late in the campaign cross-endorsed. Um, if you look at the results of that election, Catherine Garcia was number two quite a bit to Andrew Yang's voters, and that was what almost put her over the top against Eric Adams. I think if they had cross endorsed a month or two earlier, we might be talking about Catherine Garcia today and not Mayor Eric Adams. I think if I were Zoran Mamdani and Brad Lander and Zelnor Myrie and Jessica Ramos, I would create a not a ticket, but a wing that says be anybody but Andrew and Eric tickets or wing. Vote for us 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then leave number 5 blank. So I think that's what on the left. I think Zoran. I think Jessica Ramos has the potential to surprise people. Again, I don't think she has enough of a constituency and a coalition to win, but I think for a first-time candidate for mayor, I think she's going to surprise some people. I think Zelma Myrie is a very smart young man, and I think he also has a bright future. Um, I think Scott Stringer is the dark horse in some respects because if Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo savage each other, and the Democrats are looking for a moderate, experienced hand, who may not be the most dynamic of the candidates, but somebody who clearly has some competence and experience.
A Beam
And
2.0.
I mean, yeah, that would be a little unfair to Scott to call him A Beam 2.0, but
Because he was a one
yes,
term. Because he was a one-term
you're
mayor.
yeah, and not a successful mayor, and I wouldn't want to curse Scott that way, but yes, I mean, A Beam was a safe choice after a flashy mayor in John Lindsay. And that's, I think, the city, if I were running for mayor now, whether I was Scott Stringer or someone else of his or Brad Lander, I would kind of borrow a phrase that came out. I think it was in the Ed Koch campaign, which was something like, "After 8 years of Clubhouse, isn't it time for competence?" But I would change it a little bit and say, "After 4 years of corruption, isn't it time for competence?"
Wow. Well, there you
Um,
go. You wrote an ad.
I think Scott could run on the competence issue, and if people, just want somebody who, has a track record of surrounding himself with talented people, and is a steady hand when he was borough president and steady hand as controller, he has a shot. I don't. Again, I wouldn't bet a lot on him at this point, but I think he's a dark horse just because he's a moderate. And I think and again, Brad Lander, I think, is also, there's a path. Like he reminds me of De Blasio in the sense that he might hang back and be near the bottom of the pack until April, May, and then make a surge at the end, which is what De Blasio did both when he ran for public advocate and ran for mayor. So, there's a number of people who could surprise us, but right now, Andrew Cuomo would be the person I'd bet on if I had to bet, but I wouldn't bet a lot.
Anything you want to add to the conversation that I forgot to mention? Thank you for taking the time on a holiday weekend to take the time to talk to me and support me as you always have, and have sort of mentored so many others. And
Oh no,
a lot
no.
you've mentored a lot of people. People are not aware that you mentored, but I know. I know of
Well, thank you,
how many ways you've helped so many people. And the thing that's admirable about you is you've helped a whole lot of people when you didn't have to and you didn't need to, which is more impressive. Speaks to your
thank you,
character and who you are. You've helped me
thank you,
tremendously, and I appreciate
th-
it.
thank you, Roberta. I know that really that makes me. You've made my day, my week, my month for saying that. Yeah, listen, I just want to say I love this city. I've lived here 62 years. Me and my parents were Holocaust survivors who came here. with no education, and they raised two sons here, and both my brother and I thrived because of New York City. He's a product of Bronx Science. I'm a product of Stuyvesant public high schools that were what elevated the immigrant class then and now, which is why I believe so much in public education, quality public education. I've raised three children here. I have a fourth stepchild now. I want them to live in a safe city where they can raise their children and hopefully very soon my grandchildren. I'm bullish on New York's future, and what I've done in my career through City and State, through the weekly newspapers that I owned in Manhattan for many years, and through the Five Boro Institute, has been trying to do whatever I can, in a non-elected way, to help people and to improve the civic dialogue. And I'll just say one last little plug for something I'm working on, if I may, since I have the microphone for 2 more minutes.
Please.
I'm working with a group of people, of journalists, on an organization that was started by a woman named Lara Bergen about 2 years ago, called Press Pass NYC. And our goal is to get newspapers or news websites into every public high school in the city. Right now, only 100 out of 400 public high schools have any kind of journalism program, and of course, those are in white neighborhoods and not in minority neighborhoods. Um, there's a study that shows that 75% of minority journalists started on their high school newspaper. I texted Eric Adams about this a year and a half ago when I first got involved, or a year ago. And I said, you've always complained about the dearth of minority journalists. I said, well, here's an upstream solution to your downstream problem. Start a newspaper or news website in every public high school, and you will not only solve that problem, but you will help students learn media literacy. They'll learn about this, how to prevent disinformation, and on a very macro level, the kids at George Washington High School who want to know where their football game is on Saturday, where they're playing, they can go to the website, the news website, and learn about that. And it's a way for kids to communicate in high school. We've met with the chancellor. We've met with superintendents. I met with the deputy mayors about it. Everybody loves this idea. It's like mom and apple pie. It only costs $10,000 per school to get a journalism program off the ground. We do a boot camp for a week with a faculty advisor, and give them a stipend to help get it off the ground. And then we do a boot camp with two or three editors, and get them trained. And then through modern technology, you can build a news website, and all of a sudden you've got a student publication. Um, it would be my great honor and legacy if somebody, some philanthropist or the city council or the mayor's office would find $3 million over the next 5 years, so that we could get the other 300 high schools to add these journalism programs. And ultimately, it would be great to have a curriculum that was adopted in high school so that students can take an elective in journalism, and then put the publication out through that class. So that's another legacy project that I'm working on
Thank
right
you.
now.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Tom. And just to speak to the beauty of our city
Mm-hmm.
and immigration and the changes throughout, um, how wonderful and beautiful this city is. And thank you for your contributions, Tom.
Thank
Manny
you.
Ramirez attended George Washington High School, and so did
Mm-hmm.
Henry Kissinger.
That's right.
So
Hey,
those that don't like immigration should be reminded that that's what makes New York City where everyone wants to be. And I say I always
exactly.
piggyback off the mayor's line. Those that aren't from here wish they were, which is
Absolutely.
absolutely true. So that is a
And all of,
that's an right goes to show you how beautiful this city is in the
absolutely.
diversity.
And listen, when I look at migrants coming to New York, I don't think of them as people who are invading our city. I think of them as my parents
Same,
and my
same,
grandparents. And we were treated with open arms then. And I'm not sure why this country has changed its view of
same.
immigrants.
I'll give you one example, Tom, and I'll wrap it up because I don't want
Sure.
to go on and on. I grew up near Roosevelt Avenue. Roosevelt
Hmm.
Avenue, pre post migrant, has always been a booming
Yep.
corridor for immigrants. pre-migrant crisis, street
Yep.
vendors, and from all, you have the most diverse place in the world in that
Yeah.
corridor. Take it from someone who grew up here, like for real.
Hmm.
It can tell you stories for days. So I agree. We are New York. We're resilient. 9/11 was supposed to take us out. I mean, the stock exchange, a crash in the 20s. We're still here,
Yep.
and we're only getting
Any
stronger.
anybody that bets against New York is going to lose their shirt.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. And hopefully, this is only the first of many conversations you and I have about
I
all
look forward to it.
things
I look
the
forward to it.
betterment of New York City. Thank you, Tom. Have a great week.
Thanks.
Bye
Thanks
bye.
for having